today we have a lot of things to talk about. Hey, Donka, how you doing, man?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah, you doing all right? Have you heard of a game called Rising Thunder?
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it? You're about to learn more about it because joining us today is a very special guest, the guy that we've actually wanted to have on the show before, Seth Killian. None other than Seth Killian himself, the OG of OGs. There he is. How's it going, man? Welcome to the Loadout.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So, Rising Thunder, giant robots, rock'em sock'em. What can you tell us about Rising Thunder? What was the inspiration for Rising Thunder?
Well, I don't need to tell you I love fighting games a lot. They've been a huge part of my life and just sort of opened me personally to a ton of things and introduced me to amazing people from all around the world. But it's also no secret that fighting games are hard. And as somebody who's been sort of talking to people about fighting games and trying to teach people and invite them into the sort of the magical world that I see as competitive fighting games, I lose about 90% of my audience as soon as we start getting into the motions. And the thing that's so sad for me is that a lot of that, the special move inputs and the coordination required just really, it takes just a grind. And there's a lot of people like myself and a lot of my friends for many years who went through that grind and came out the other side. And that's been awesome. It's given us amazing gaming experiences. But at the same time, I was like, most of the stuff, when I started thinking about it, most of the stuff that I really love about these games didn't really have a lot to do with, a quarter circle forward or a 720 motion or hitting all three buttons. It was more about the mind games and the reads. And so I was sort of, I'd sort of stepped back from actually making fighting games for a while. And it had been such a big part of my life. I needed to sort of, take a break, recollect myself. But I got this bug in my head and started thinking about fighting games again. And it's like, does it really have to be like about, crazy motions and these complicated inputs that, I know are going to throw a lot of people off the horse? Is it possible to make a fighting game that is both like a real fighting game? But that just doesn't have that. And of course, everyone was like, oh yeah, the answer is no. That's a stupid idea.
So it sounds like you
I decided to do it myself.
So yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you were like, you know what, let me just make the damn game and let me show you what it can be like. I find that interesting that the whole connection to wanting to share it with your friends. So, I mean, anecdotally, I'm a married guy, and I try to get my wife into fighting games, and she'll enjoy it. She'll watch it, and as a spectator, she can get into it, but certainly not in the motions. Exactly. You get that disconnect when you have to explain, oh, you have to do, forward, down, back, down, forward, or a 720 or all these other things.
It's like you have to do gymnastics or something, like now there's like the separate event where we have to practice gymnastics for an hour, and then we'll get to play like, a fun game.
But on the far end of the spectrum, you have a game like, let's say, Dive Kick, right? Where Dive Kick was ultra simplified. Anybody could play that game, and I got my wife to play that game a couple times. But even though that game is deep and has, can be competitive, maybe the lasting appeal, I haven't picked it up in a while.
Yeah, I mean, Dive Kick is a very narrow kind of implementation. I think the idea was brilliant. I was a Kickstarter backer of that from the very beginning and known Keats for a long time, developer of Dive Kick, now at Iron Galaxy, working on Killer Instinct. Smart guy. I think it was a fun game and a really interesting concept. I think there is a real competitive game there, but yeah, I could see in terms of long-term playability, maybe the girlfriend or the wife is after getting kicked in the face enough times is, it doesn't have maybe some of the stretch that you'd get out of a more complicated sort of traditional fighter.
If I remember correctly, she probably has the winning record over me on on Dive Kick. But Seth, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because it's been in the air and we've been hearing about it a lot, for instance, with Street Fighter V, is this idea that the game needs to be more accessible. Certainly that theme is present in Rising Thunder. Why do we need to make... I mean, it's a softball question, but in your opinion, why do we need to make fighting games more accessible?
Well, I mean, to put it like in the most basic terms, I think for me, I think competitive games inherently get more interesting the more people are playing. the more minds and the more people from different walks of life you can get involved in a competitive game, they just get better. Like they get richer. People will develop crazy new strategies, even for games we might not think of as sort of traditionally competitive. So I think if you can combine that kind of openness and the core awesome of fighting games with the mind games and the zoning and footsies and just making really hard reads on like I see exactly what you're thinking and I'm going to counter it. If you can bring that together and strip away some of the things that we know are keeping people away from fighting games, you're talking about something that becomes really exciting. And I look at honestly like all the big competitive games, for as much as the fighting game community has grown, and it really means the world to me. And people make fun of me all the time because I literally tear up sometimes when I think
We're
about
gonna get to it. I have that's written down on my notes here. We'll talk about that later, Seth.
Okay, yeah. It's so powerful to me that I it's very moving to me because it's been a big part of my life and I've seen it grow from sort of nothing into what it's been today. But then you also at the same time see other games making even huger leaps, and those games aren't any less competitive or demanding, but the one thing that they all have in common is things like being free. So people can just get in there right away. And they also have, although there's a ton of complexity and a ton of hard decisions to make, and everything from your Counter-Strike to your Dota to, you name it, while understanding and mastering the actual game is really hard, doing the basic stuff like aiming and shooting, or casting my ult or whatever, that's not stuff that you screw up, right? Like those are the basic core elements of the game. And the game really develops around deciding when to do those things, how to do those things, how to coordinate with teammates in some cases, how to be, maybe you're really excellent at aiming, but also you have a lot of stage knowledge, so you know exactly where people are on the map, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's proven that you can have like super competitive games without these kind of executional barriers, and people even taking games that have relatively simple inputs push it to the limit so they do have executional edges and interesting limits. But I guess my idea was really not to try and make a simplified or a basic or even an accessible fighter. I just thought if you're making a competitive game and you're building it around moves like Fireball, Dragon Punch, these kind of concepts, people should be able to just do Fireball and Dragon Punch. Like, if that's the core basis of your game, let people access that and then see where they go from there. And that's been, the kind of thing I didn't really know if it would work. That was sort of the theory. But we've been just completely floored by the response so far. So, yeah, that's why I look tired and wiped out. It's we've been working a lot harder than we thought we were going to in the last couple of weeks.
I think it's pretty awesome that the inputs are easier to do, but I guess one of my questions would be, some of the executional barriers added time to input a move. Doing a Shoryuken required you to do a forward, a down, and a down forward, which takes a couple frames or 60th of a second of input to accomplish. Yeah. How do you kind of compensate for that in Rising Thunder, where you can do a Dragon Punch in one frame and react quicker than you might be able to in a Street Fighter game? Does that hurt the balance, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's absolutely a thing. I mean, everything from the joystick position that you had to be in to start a Dragon Punch or something like that, which is a forward motion, which means you can't be blocking at the same time you start it. All these things, anytime you take literally any competitive game in the world and you change the input scheme, that's going to have gameplay implications. The question then is whether those gameplay implications are good or bad. So is there real gameplay differences between this and something like a traditional Street Fighter because of the input scheme? Absolutely. Or is it possible to react to things with a Dragon Punch that in Rising Thunder that you might not be able to in another game? I think absolutely. So it does change the game. It does change the meta and the way you have to approach each situation. But at the same time, does it make it better or worse? That's an open question, and that's sort of what we're deciding right now with the playing. And actually, what's been really exciting to me is you'd think the idea of being able to like react to everything with a Dragon Punch, or I mean, you can't, but the idea that you can react more easily with a Dragon Punch would be like a big benefit to the guy who can do the Dragon Punch. But it's still, an uppercut kind of motion where if you miss or if you're blocked and you go sailing into the sky, you're going to get hammered on the way down. So what actually happens is people play the game and they try and play it like a Street Fighter or something like that, and they get uppercut a lot for like the first 3, 4 matches, and they're like, man, this seems really busted. Like everybody's just uppercutting me, blah, blah, blah. Totally get it. Totally fair. And then, sort of a little light bulb goes on in their head and they're like, so if this guy is going to uppercut every single time I knock him down or whatever, maybe I'll just wait a second and watch him go sailing up into the sky and then hammer him on the way down. So you realize that it actually just sort of shifts the meta of the situation into a new place. It doesn't actually, the ability to uppercut doesn't mean it's actually a good idea to uppercut that often. And as you'll see very quickly, if you try those kind of tactics consistently in Rising Thunder, you're not going to make it very high in the ranks at all. There's a lot of sharks out there preying on exactly those kind of behaviors. So it just becomes sort of another mind game. And again, honestly, we didn't really know what the effect of that would be when push came to shove. But it's been really interesting so far, and people have developed a lot of amazing counter strategies.
So it sounds like you tried to focus it more heavily on reads. And in the same manner, throws are mapped to a button, and I don't believe there's actually anything in the game that requires you to hit 2 buttons at once.
We got one. We got Kinetic Deflect. We decided not to add any more buttons, but you can use sort of a combo breaker style move, and you can press 2 special buttons to do that. But that is, you have now identified the most complicated input in all of Rising Thunder.
So with that being said, when you press a button, does it now instantly come out and not allow for like Karas to make sure for the other glitches that happen in other games? Because I figured that by having a throw button, you'd kind of get rid of the option to option select, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so option selects are something that are sort of an endless source of fun for strong players because they, you can create a lot of sort of surprising techniques. We've seen some very, very late period Ultra Street Fighter 4 option selects, at least popularized by players like Momochi, where they have crazy triple option selects where it's Dragon Punch if you don't block, dash back if you did block, and then throw otherwise, where it's like, wait, what? You can cover all 3 of those options at once? That doesn't seem right. So obviously nobody on the design side intends things like that. So for us, we wanted to try and strip the OS kind of option out of it. And that really is not a matter of, we don't want there to be cool or surprising stuff in the game. We absolutely do. But I think opening the door to option selects just necessarily takes you down a road that wasn't part of your design. I mean, if you want those kind of things as part of your design, you can build them into the game. If you know they're there as option selects, you can try and work around them. But what usually ends up happening with fighting game players who just try and break a game is they will take it in a direction that wasn't really intended by the designers. And sometimes that can be an amazing thing. I think that Unintended Consequences did amazing things for games like Capcom versus SNK 2 with roll canceling and that kind of glitch. But more often than not, it's sort of option selects they seem like a cool and advanced technique, but they actually tend to make the game more narrow because I have to but with an option select, you're literally making less decisions. You're doing some sort of complicated special input that covers every option available to the defender. So you're playing actually a more narrow, sort of smaller game, even though it requires a lot of technology and sort of careful analysis and effort on your part. The ultimate result of that is playing a narrower game that can be less interesting in some ways. So we wanted to just sort of minimize the options or minimize the likelihood of getting that kind of stuff from the get-go with our game.
Seth, I mean, things like option selects to this new crowd of players that are coming in, that's, over their head to a degree.
Sure.
And we're talking about stripping some of those elements away and making it more accessible. I've been very surprised to see guys like Alex Valle, guys like Snake Eyes just going to town on this game on their streams. In the meantime, before I ask you the question, I'm going to be playing this combo video that Duplis came out with. How have you felt, basically? I mean, that's the question. How have you felt seeing the reaction from some of these more established competitive gamers, fighting game staples, that are really enjoying this game?
Honestly, it's been a shock, and it's just an incredible feeling. Like, when I set out to make this game, obviously, given my background, given the Cannon's background, other people on the team, we're not interested in making like baby's first fighting game or a game that we're not going to find interesting to play ourselves as people who've been, playing and making these games for a lot of years. But at the same time, we understand sort of the conservatism of the traditional fighting game community and how they're often resistant to anything that smells like a change or a new direction. And this is a lot of new directions at once. So frankly, we weren't really expecting anybody from the sort of core fighting game community to jump into this game right at the outset. Mm-hmm. But what we've seen has been the absolute opposite in a way I could not have believed. So you're talking about Alex Valle, you're talking about Snake Eyes, Rico Suave has been playing it. Mm-hmm. I've had a stream on in the background with him for he said, I'm just going to do a short stream. 5 hours later, he's still playing. We've got, so those are champions from Killer Instinct, champions from Street Fighter, champions from KOF. We've had Reynald, who's one of the greatest players I've seen playing Rising Thunder. He's a KOF Evo champion. So it's literally Street Fighter, Killer Instinct. We've had great Mortal Kombat players. We've had great Smash players as well getting into the game. Famous tournament players there as well. So literally that was kind of the concept of the game, is like, I want to have like a fighting game, that it's like a gathering, just an amazing gathering, like a great party where you could where everybody can come. Like those are to me always the best parties, like where everybody's invited and it's not just sort of a select crew or a pre-selected list of, screened people that you're all approving of. The best parties always come from like crazy oddballs showing up, or like there's somebody else a little bit off to the left or you wouldn't have expected to show up. And I wanted to build a fighting game where all those people could come and play together, sort of irrespective of their backgrounds and what kind of mechanics they know. And, the Smash guys are often not into sort of traditional kind of fighting games. Not too many traditional fighting game guys try and play Smash. Here's a game that may be somewhere in the middle, but just sort of sets a lot of those mechanics aside and provides a competitive experience where it really is about hard reads and sort of fighting game fundamentals.
If you spend any time, I've been checking out our Rising Thunder on Reddit. Mm-hmm. And you see a lot of people, you can tell this is their very first fighting game. And I think that's cool, right? It's like almost like a gateway to fighting games to a degree. Do you want it to be the gateway, or do you want it to be the next esport? You're talking about taking cues from League of Legends and free to play, and it'll always be free. And in fact, congratulations on getting the alpha free or open to everybody now.
Thank you. Yeah.
What do you want it to see? Do you want it to be that introduction for new members of the fighting game community? 15ers, we'll call them, I guess. Or do you want it to be the sustained esport? This is the beginning of that next wave.
I guess to me, I look at them as the same thing. Like to have the kind of scope of the games that we all, the International just ended. Mm-hmm. You see everybody from the fighting game community piping in about that. Piping? Is that the word? That's not the word I'm going for. Everyone's popping off about it and, making comments and is inspired or jealous or whatever. To try and reach that level, I think if you're looking at a game that 80, 90% of the people that try it can't actually play it, like they try it, they buy it. Maybe they actually go out and buy a game, and then they try and play it for an hour, 5 hours a week, and they still can't do like the core basic elements that the game was built around. I think expecting that to sort of grow to epic levels is, I think it'll grow. It'll still keep growing. But I think you need both. You need a game that has the sort of serious sort of underpinning, the serious core, that can propel it that make it worth excellent players' time to invest and to think through strategies and to learn all the ins and outs of the matchups and the characters. But you also need a game that you can realistically put in somebody else's hands and just let them play with it for a while and have them start to understand it and learn it on their own in a time that's, not 3 months, not 6 months of practicing just to be able to do a fireball or an uppercut. There's, in the time we've been talking here, there's probably 30 new games that came out on Steam. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you really think that like it's a realistic proposition to ask people to be like, hey, there's all this other fun stuff in the universe, or you could be looking at, funny things on the internet or watching a movie or whatever. No, please practice this game for 6 months. We know it's not fun, but 6 months from now, you'll eventually be having a really cool experience. Like, that is the request, and I think that you do get people that way, and a lot of those people are my best friends and people I've known for a long time and really awesome people. But you also lose, I think, about 90% of the people who are interested at the start and then just don't. And so it's easy from our position as hardcore and the people that did put in that time to look down on them and be like, yeah, you're quitters, you're a bunch of losers, you couldn't hack it, whatever. But at the same time, I think you have to just look around at the reality of the situation and watch the games that have achieved these sort of unprecedented levels of competition. And they're the games that keep that the high highs are completely there. Like, you can go and play and be, there's always a new level of expertise and skill to achieve. But at the same time, it's the kind of game that people can pick up and get the hang of pretty fast.
All right. Well, talking about the community again, obviously you have all the amazing feedback you've gotten on the game. There's also going to be some negatives, and mostly about inner gameplay things. Some people have complained about DP cancels. Snake Eyes last week on the show said that Edge was in a tier of his own. I noticed that you actually remedied both of those in a patch this week. How do you feel about patching, and how do you cater to requests of both newer players that you're trying to keep around with the game and the more veteran players who want a completely balanced game?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Well, first, thanks for noticing that we had a new patch today. So we have been trying to add stuff to the game every week, not just patching to try and rebalance it, but adding new moves for the characters, adding new things like that, actual interesting gameplay stuff, not just twiddling knobs to turn this down by a frame here and there. But we had a dev blog also today that we put up talking a little bit about our philosophy on balancing. And I speak for the whole team here when I say this, but I grew up the hard way playing arcade Street Fighter games that the idea of a patch was they're going to put a champion edition on the name afterwards, and that's your patch, right? Like,
yeah.
Now everybody's got a different color, and that'll come out 2 years from now, and and I think because of that sort of like basically no patch environment that we started in, you see some of those games just reach incredible heights where people learn so much about the game that things that formerly seemed impossible were worked out to be. There was an amazing counter that someone invented, and it completely changed the game. I love that stuff. So our philosophy on balancing, in a nutshell, is let it rock. So we said on the dev blog today that we look at balancing as something, in general, larger balance patches. Expect those maybe twice a year, maybe 3 times. So we'll look at it like maybe a twice annual basis, maybe a 3 times annual basis. But on the other hand, right now what we've got is an alpha test, right? Like, this is alpha is there to signal like this is literally the earliest possible time we could be showing you this game. We could be letting people play this game. We know it's not perfect. We know we have a lot of things to do. We launched the game. Some people have looked at the look and said, well, this isn't, going to win any awards for look. We launched the game with only 2 textured characters. Like, you'd be fired at most game studios for releasing a game without even bothering to texture most of your characters. But we were like, hey, we know the gameplay is fun. Let's let it rip. And in terms of balancing, we knew that Edge was coming in hot, and there were a couple of loose ends, shall we say. So we wanted to let those play out for a little while. And we've also looked at some of the DP canceling and the frame advantage there, and I think found some elegant solutions. So the response, it's only been out for 4 or 5 hours now with a new live patch, but the response has been really, really positive so far. So I'm grateful for the player community. But the other thing is, we like legit need your feedback. Like, we're a tiny team. Most of the games that you see, these fighting games, so I like to think I know a thing or two about balance, but in the past, a lot of the developers have had the benefit of 100, 200 man testing teams to put things through their paces. We built this game with 8 guys, and some of those guys aren't good at fighting games. Even if they love them, they stink. So they're basically not helpful in terms of balance and things like that. So when I say we need your feedback, that's not me shining you on and being like, yeah, cool guys. Oh, that's interesting. Like, maybe we'll change that. We're not going to change that. we totally need the feedback, and I've been around long enough to know that for as much as I think I know, I don't know everything, and you also there's no way to possibly understand what the full implications of your game are. You have your little bubble and your theories about how this is going to match up with this and blah blah blah. Then you put it in the hands of 100,000, 200,000 people, and oh, like this is a surprise, or we didn't know about that one. So there's always going to be surprises. So for the alpha phase, we're definitely taking a more active hand. Our objective is definitely not trying to create a perfectly balanced game right now. We want to make sure our networking and online code is rock solid and just the absolute best it can be, and test all of the infrastructure there. But we also are taking, I wouldn't be me if I wasn't also looking at balance. So we think now is the time to sort of try some new experiments, to be a little more free with this kind of stuff. We don't want to do anything that's going to radically destabilize the game or make any, former strategy completely inviable anymore. But we do want to tone things down if we think this has gone a little too far, or, we look at the chain of options characters have from different positions and say, all of his options from here are purely positive. There's not a good counter. So to have this sort of epic game of rocks, paper, scissors where you always have a rock to counter their scissors or something like that, if you're willing to make the right read and lay it all on the line. If you've got no great options, then that's our bad, and so we need to try and look at that and address it. So we will, and so we'll be taking a more active approach to balancing during the alpha. But once we get to what we consider the end of our testing period, you can expect it to calm down to maybe 1 or 2 times a year.
All right. Well, speaking of feedback, we reached out and asked a couple people what they wanted to know as far as balance goes and what concerns they had. So I'll rattle off a couple. Currently, loadouts aren't displayed when playing someone. Is that on purpose so that you have to scope out their special moves, or is that something you're going to add? What is the opinion behind that?
That is exactly one of the things that we are interested in sort of testing. So in a lot of ways, this is sort of a familiar game, right? When you look at it from one perspective, there's a lot of sort of familiar stuff in this game. But from another perspective, especially in terms of the overall game design, this is pretty brand new. There's not been sort of clear examples of games that are doing things quite the way we're doing. And one of the things we were really excited about design-wise was the chance to do things that we call internally sort of hidden information. So, you've seen the game a little bit. You know how Crow can go completely invisible on the opponent's screen when he uses his special move 3 is a Fog of War. He can cast a bubble around himself, which if you're playing as Crow and you cast that move, it's basically you can totally still see yourself. On your opponent's screen, you're completely invisible. So I get really excited about these kind of potential disparities in knowledge and what you can hide from your opponent and what you can't. So when it comes to things like knowing the loadout of your opponent's special moves, that's something we're experimenting with a little bit. And it might be the way we're doing it might sort of work out, or it might not. And we, again, not only want the feedback, but we're just looking at it and playing it with for ourselves and saying, is this fun? Is this a learnable thing? Am I able to make interesting choices around the kind of gameplay that this is creating, or is it just frustrating? And I think right now we have a mix of a little bit of both, where there's some elements that are hidden that maybe end up feeling a little bit frustrating, and then there are some elements that are hidden that are actually really cool. So for us, nobody's really made a fighting game where you can only see, what's on your screen is different than what's on my screen. And that hasn't really happened before. So we're experimenting and want to figure it out sort of, again, in conversation with that community. And all the fans who've supported us have been playing the game hard. So we really do want to sort of look at that and be like, is this fun and interesting? Or does this suck and just feel confusing and make me feel like I'm playing with blinders on?
All right. Another one we got was that kinetic deflect seems to be somewhat weak and underutilized right now. I personally took it as kind of a beginner mode for the game, but I was wondering if it's just something that hasn't caught up yet, or players not using it yet, or is it what did you intend with kinetic deflect versus the other mode?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's understandable that a lot of players go straight for the kinetic advance because it's definitely a little bit more exciting in terms of branching options and the way you can approach the game and the way you can sort of style it. Deflect is one, it is a great option for beginners. If you're somebody who doesn't understand how throws work or whatever, and you just get thrown over and over again, I think I'm happy to have that you potentially have that option. But at the other end of it, in terms of the more sort of serious spectrum, it is actually, in my view, sort of currently underused. I think there are existing matchups and existing builds you can create, existing loadouts, I should say. We're on the loadout. How can I not say loadout? Say it one more time. Loadout. There are loadouts you can build that I actually think are depending on the matchup, highly advantageous to use Kinetic Deflect. So it is underutilized a little bit. And again, the game is new for a lot of people, and it's sort of more short-term fun to play with Kinetic Advance. So that's not something I'm unhappy about at all. Again, as more moves come online, more variants for the different characters, I think the ideas will start popping in people's heads about like, okay, well, if I'm up against a Crow or maybe a Talos who has, explosive combo potential, but has to really make the most of few opportunities, Deflect can be a really, really strong option, I think, even at the highest competitive levels. So it's going to be a matter of a little bit of vision in terms of the players, but also them getting a clearer view of what our full picture of possible moves are for the characters. So we'll be bringing more of those out every single week with new moves for the characters, and I think ideas about Kinetic Deflect may start to take hold, and you'll see a little bit of that. But again, I don't look at Kinetic Advance and Kinetic Deflect as necessarily, well, they must be equally viable in all situations. One, I don't think that's realistic, and two, they're just options. So it may turn out that for your character, you want to be playing Advance in 60, 70% of your matches, your potential matchups. That's cool. I consider that a-okay. Just in the same way that you might not necessarily want to use one of your variant moves in every single build that you do. Kinetic Advance and Deflect are just another tool that you can apply as the situation, both in terms of the matchup and also in terms of what player am I playing against.
And then a final fan question. I'm sure you've gotten this a million times. Do you play Rising Thunder cross-handed?
Oh man, I have to admit that I actually started playing on a stick for the early part of our development, and I did indeed play Rising Thunder cross-handed. I switched to keyboard partway through, which anybody that knows me knows I not only love playing on stick, but I really play in a very unusual way. I ended up switching to keyboard because I just really loved the precision and the immediate access to all the buttons. It's like, you meet those people who are on hitboxes, and they're like religious converts or something, and they won't shut up about the hitbox and how it's completely changed their game and revolutionized it. I'm a little bit like that with keyboards right now. And I play cross-handed only on stick. When it comes to keyboard, I play with my hands in the sort of the proper position, I suppose we should say proper. But yeah, I can still play both ways though. So maybe on a bar bet, I'll take you up on the challenge to play cross-handed keyboard style.
Seth, there's two things that I wanted to talk to you about that I'd like you to address. One thing that I'm really excited about, and one thing that I kind of lament. The thing that I'm excited about is the idea that you now have to have in your head a timer of cooldowns and how that affects the game. I think that's an interesting element to the game that I'd like you to address. The thing that I lament is the loss of local multiplayer on it. That to me, fighting games from my childhood, sitting next to my brothers, standing next to somebody at an arcade, is this just? That's what has to happen.
I guess maybe we should start in reverse, and then maybe you'll have to remind me about the first, because I'll probably talk too much about this as well. In terms of focusing on online, we really did look at that sort of as an opportunity rather than sort of a constraint, because we had to nail the online. Like, everybody talks about playing together with their friends, and it's funny that you mentioned the story about when you were a kid with your brother and how you were playing together online or playing together on the couch or whatever with local multiplayer. Almost everybody's story is actually like that. Like, it's actually a historical story talking about like how they played when they were kids. And that was true, and that was real, and that was a huge part of my own experience for a very long time. I mean, obviously, still traveling to tournaments all around the world just to be in the same room with people, so we can, not only have that kind of great local experience, but also connect with each other as people. Think now about your current life and the way you actually play games and the way you live most of your life. If you're like a lot of people I know, and even like me, you live a lot of your life online. You spend a lot of your day online, whether you're on your phone, whether you're at the computer, whether you're, wherever you might be. That to me is the primary way we keep in contact with most people in our lives today. And so, one, to try and address that issue of like, hey, online for fighting games, not really there. It's not really world class. So we wanted to fix that and have put a lot of effort into that. And then look at it as an opportunity on the design side as well. So I do think that, well, we all like the idea of everybody coming over to our house and we're all going to hang out and get a pizza and talk some smack and play fighting games. That's still going to happen. That'll be great. But I think the reality 9 times out of 10 is your friends don't come over, or that guy couldn't make it or whatever. So you end up playing online. So our focus has been making that experience as amazing as it could be. And take me back to question number 1.
Well,
cooldowns.
Yeah, it was about cooldowns. But
go.
to your point, I still play Street Fighter with my brothers, and we play online, of course. But the idea that cooldowns is as a new something you need to be thinking about. It's like you think about meter management, like you think about positioning. Now you need to think about the cooldowns. I don't want to I want to hear the answer, but I promise I wouldn't keep it too long, and there's something else I want to get to. So if you could give me an answer on that as a design element for the game.
Sure. It's something we wanted to do. I mean, one, if you've got one button specials and you want to do things like invincible uppercut and things like that, which I think are important to me in terms of reversals and that kind of mind game possibility, you got to find some way to control that. So traditionally, you've seen things like EX moves, whatnot, the input timers, but frankly, like elements of timed sort of input have been present in fighting games from the start. You look at something like Guile's Sonic Boom. That move is literally on a cooldown plus a charge. Things like the assists in Marvel, those are really fun moves. But it would be, that's already a pretty complicated game. It would be even worse if you could just spam that button over and over again and have the assists just constantly fly onto the screen. So those are literally on a timed cooldown. You don't actually see the cooler or the cooldown timer, but it's absolutely there. So in some ways, this isn't that radically new, nor is it some invention. Only MOBAs have ever thought of this before. It's completely a thing. It's just time. At the same time, I think when people hear it, they just assume, well, that sounds like it sucks. I just want to throw a bunch of fireballs or uppercut or whatever. And I get that. So that's part of why we wanted to put the game out and make it free and playable right away, because I'm not going to win that argument. Like if we were just sitting here talking about this and none of you had ever seen the game or played it, you'd be like, this guy is an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Like that'll never work. And we didn't want to build it in a way that would allow us to have sort of the traditional kind of fights that we love from fighting games. So it's a lot of careful balancing to make sure that the moves are available enough to sort of support the gameplay, but that you can also advance the gameplay by forcing someone, if they want to commit to a move that they know has a significant cooldown, they have to be prepared for the consequences afterwards, not just in terms of punish, in terms of positive frames and things like that, but also there are interesting situations already developing in Rising Thunder where you see people, they bait an uppercut and they'll go for a punish, but they don't necessarily go for max punish right away. What they'll instead do is like knock somebody down and then go in hard for a mix-up, knowing that that character now has burned their uppercut. So they're going to be without the uppercut option on the incoming mix-up, which completely changes the meta for a period of about 1.5 seconds, something like that. So you have really interesting, like brief windows of a new angle of attack or something that completely changes the options that they have available to them. And I get super excited about stuff like that. So I've already seen smart players like finding new ways to take advantage of this, producing resets, making the opponent guess. So it's definitely one of those mechanics that I think could have very easily sucked. And if you give me another chance, I could definitely make a really terrible version of this game with like horrible cooldowns that are no fun and is exactly what everybody might suspect when they first hear about this game. But instead, we've done what we have done. And you'll see it's actually a surprisingly kind of fast-paced game in a lot of ways, with a lot of hard-hitting action. So what you'd expect of like just sort of waiting around for your moves to come back isn't the kind of gameplay that we're seeing at all. And so I'm pretty excited about the way it's turned out right now.
Seth, let's transport ourselves about a month ago, or less now, I think, to EVO Grand Finals of Street Fighter. I'm going to run a nice little montage here of images that I collected. This is already post-award ceremony. Cut to James Chen and Seth Killian at the commentators table. And, I mean, we all love James Chen, of course. Who can't? And, he gets emotional. And so do you after you guys embrace. Talk to me a little bit about that moment. Why, right? I mean, anybody who was there can feel it. Of course, there was that gamer bee thing. But still, that emotion that comes out, why is that a thing that happens?
Yeah, I mean, James and I have a long history together. We've known each other and been friends and arguing partners on the internet for even longer than we've ever even known each other. And it's been a long connection for both of us. But more than any sort of shared feeling we have and time we've spent together, we've watched the fighting game community like grow from literally 20, 30 dudes arguing on the internet to then, Tom Cannon from the very beginning bringing people together and saying, oh, okay, we're talking about this. Let's all smush together in this crummy arcade and figure out who's really the best. And that was a thing that's been happening for most of our lives and has taken us all over the world. And we've watched it grow to incredible places that I think neither one of us ever suspected. So in a lot of ways, I'm not a kid anymore. And when I look back on that, it's a really special thing in life to have seen something that you were a part of and has been a huge part of your life grow and change. It's kind of like watching a kid grow up and seeing everything it's become. So the other thing of it is just really an EVO specific thing in a lot of ways, or any of the community tournaments where what's happened in that room is not the product of a corporation paying money or trying to put on a marketing event or some sort of sometimes these things don't go great and it feels that the hype can feel a little fake. Everything that's happening in that room at EVO, the entire production is put on by members of the community, from the streaming to the audio staff to the production staff to the commentators to the players to the organizers, the judges. Every part of that is by us and by people that have sort of rolled into our merry band of pranksters over the years. And yeah, I'm gonna get emotional just thinking about it right now. Yeah, that it's a special thing when you have done something as a group and seen it be powerfully attractive enough to have other people sort of join the cause and lend their strengths and their skills to sort of support that for sort of no larger benefit other than we just think this is awesome and we want to be a part of it and look at this thing that we all put together by ourselves. And yeah, it's pretty touching.
Seth, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about Rising Thunder and about your experiences in the fighting game community.
Thanks for having me, man.
Good luck with the rest of Rising Thunder.
You'll be hearing from me again soon.
I hope so. Well, hopefully we can have you back on for the beta and then for the release and then for when you guys were blowing up and getting that, what was it, 18 million for the Rising Thunder International?
Dota International, yeah.
Yeah,
give us a couple of years. I need 2 years for 18 million.
All right. Okay, you got 2 years. You heard it here. It's on the record.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth.
Bye, guys.